She never imagined her life would be reduced to a single choice. Not love, not ambition, not even hope, just survival. The rain outside the courthouse fell in relentless sheets, blurring the city into gray streaks as Elena Harper sat alone on the cold marble steps, clutching a folder that felt heavier than it should have. Inside were documents she barely understood. Medical bills, overdue notices, legal threats. Each page another reminder that desperation does not care how honest or hardworking you are. 2 weeks. That was all she had left before everything collapsed. Elena was 28, a community outreach coordinator who worked with underfunded schools, the kind of job that gave meaning but not money. She was known for showing up early, staying late, and believing, perhaps foolishly, that kindness eventually came back around. But kindness didn't pay hospital bills. Her younger brother, Marcus, lay unconscious in a private care ward she could barely afford for another 10 days. A hit-and-run accident. No witnesses. No insurance coverage. And a hospital administrator who looked at her the same way people always did when money entered the conversation. Measured, distant, already prepared to say no. She had sold her car. She had emptied her savings. She had begged banks that smiled politely and declined anyway. And now, as if summoned by the universe's cruel sense of timing, a black luxury sedan rolled silently to the curb in front of her. The door opened, and the man who stepped out did not belong to her world. Julian Cross. Everyone in the city knew the name, even if they pretended not to. Billionaire investor. Tech magnate. The kind of man who appeared on magazine covers with captions about vision and discipline, the kind who walked through spaces like he owned them because most of the time he did. He wore a tailored charcoal coat, rain untouched by his presence, as if the weather itself respected him. His expression was calm, unreadable, his dark eyes sharp and observant as they landed on Elena like she was part of a puzzle he hadn't planned to solve. "Elena Harper," he said evenly. Her heart slammed. "Yes," she replied cautiously, standing despite the ache in her legs. "Do I know you?" Julian's gaze flicked briefly to the courthouse doors, then back to her face, taking in the worn coat, the frayed edges of her folder, the exhaustion she hadn't been able to hide. "No," he said. "But I know your situation." Those words hit harder than any rejection ever had. "I'm not interested in charity," she said quickly, pride flaring even through fear. "Good," Julian replied. "Neither am I." He gestured toward the car. "Get in. We need to talk." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. Men like him didn't make offers without expectations. Power always came with conditions. But then her phone vibrated in her pocket. Another reminder from the hospital billing department. Desperation is louder than instinct. She stepped inside. The car smelled faintly of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. Silence filled the space, heavy but not uncomfortable, as the city slid past the tinted windows. Julian folded his hands calmly. "I'll be direct," he said. "Your brother's medical costs will exceed $400,000 within the month. You cannot pay that. The hospital will discharge him early. His recovery will fail." Her throat tightened. "And you're telling me this because? Because I can stop it." She laughed bitterly. "Why would you?" Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, really studied her, like he was measuring something beyond numbers. "Because you don't ask for yourself," he said finally. "You never did." Her breath caught. "I've watched you," he continued. "At the nonprofit. At the schools. You fight systems that don't reward you. You endure humiliation quietly. And still you show up." "That doesn't explain why you're here," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "This does." He opened a slim folder and slid it toward her. A contract. 1 year. A personal advisory role. Exclusive. Demanding. Legally binding. In exchange. All medical debts cleared. Long-term care guaranteed. Her brother protected. She stared at the pages, her hands trembling. "You want to own me?" she said. Julian's voice was steady. "No. I want your commitment. Your competence. Your honesty. And if I say no? Then I walk away," he said without malice. "And the system does what it always does." Tears burned her eyes, not from weakness but rage. This wasn't romance. This wasn't kindness. This was power meeting desperation head-on. She looked up at him. "Why me?" she demanded. Julian's jaw tightened just slightly. "Because people underestimate you," he said. "And I don't." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof like a countdown. Elena thought of Marcus. Of hospital lights. Of doors closing one by one. She signed. The pen felt like a verdict. Julian nodded once as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Good, he said. Your life changes today. And as the car pulled away, Elena had no idea whether she had just been saved or sold. Where power tests obedience. Elena learned very quickly that saving someone's life did not mean reclaiming her own. The morning she reported to Cross Holdings, the city was still half asleep. The building rose like a blade of glass against the pale sky, 40 floors of precision, silence, and authority. She stood at the entrance for a moment longer than necessary, steadying her breath, reminding herself why she was there. Marcus was alive. That was the price. That was the purpose. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished stone and muted confidence. People moved with quiet urgency, dressed in tailored restraint, eyes forward, voices low. No one rushed, but no one wasted time either. Elena Harper. She turned. The woman approaching her was elegant in a sharp, controlled way, early 40s, dark hair pulled back, posture perfect. Her heels struck the marble floor with a sound that suggested rules mattered here. I'm Nora Vance, she said. Director of Operations. Follow me. No welcome. No smile. Elena adjusted her worn blazer and followed. The elevator ride was silent. The ascent felt endless. Your role, Nora said without looking at her, is undefined by design. Elena frowned slightly. I'm sorry? You will support Mr. Cross where he requires it. Strategically. Logistically. Personally when necessary. That last word landed heavier than the rest. Your contract protects you, Nora added. But protection is not comfort. The doors opened onto the executive floor. Glass walls. Steel lines. Quiet dominance. Julian Cross's office sat at the far end, larger than Elena's entire apartment, overlooking the city like a throne disguised as a workspace. He was already inside. Julian didn't look up when she entered. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, city reflected in the glass like a kingdom under his watch. You're early, he said. You said punctuality mattered, Elena replied. He turned slowly. Dark suit. Crisp lines. That same unreadable expression. It does, he said. Sit. She did. Julian placed a tablet on the desk and slid it toward her. Read. Her stomach tightened as she scanned the screen. Internal memos. Strategy drafts. Financial projections. This is confidential, she said carefully. Yes, Julian replied. And now it's your responsibility. Her eyes lifted. I don't have an MBA. I'm not. You're observant, he cut in. You listen. And you see what others ignore. That's why you're here. Pause. And because, he added, no one in this building will hand you respect. Her jaw set. I don't need it handed to me. Julian's gaze sharpened, just slightly. Good. By midday, Elena understood what he meant. Meetings happened around her, not with her. Executives spoke over her, dismissed her suggestions without acknowledging them, assumed she was an assistant meant to take notes and fetch coffee. One man didn't even look at her when he said, Can you bring these copies to legal? Elena did it. Silently. Efficiently. But she listened. She noticed contradictions in proposals. Inconsistencies in timelines. Gaps between promises and projections. And she wrote them down. That afternoon, Julian summoned her back into his office. What did you hear? He asked. She hesitated. Do you want the polite version or the accurate one? Julian leaned back slightly. Accuracy. She exhaled. The European expansion plan is inflated. The projected adoption rate ignores regional regulation delays. And 3 people in that meeting are hedging personal bonuses against failure. The silence that followed was dangerous. Julian stared at her. Then, slowly he smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Exactly, he said. The next week was harder. Word spread. Not kindness, suspicion. Why was she there? What had she done to earn proximity to Julian Cross? Why did he ask her questions others weren't asked? Whispers followed her through hallways. Eyes measured her worth like a price tag. One afternoon in the break room someone finally said it out loud. So, a woman scoffed, leaning against the counter, what's your real job, Elena? The room went quiet. Elena met her gaze calmly. My real job, she said, is doing what no one else here is willing to do, tell the truth. The woman laughed dismissively. Please. You don't even belong here. Julian's voice cut through the room like steel. She belongs exactly where I put her. Everyone froze. Julian stood in the doorway, expression controlled, eyes cold. If anyone here has an issue with that, he continued evenly, you may schedule a meeting with HR. Or you may leave. No one spoke. Julian turned to Elena. Come with me. In his office, the door closed softly behind them. You handled that well, he said. I didn't ask you to defend me, she replied. I know, Julian said. That's why I did. She swallowed. This place is designed to break people. Yes, he agreed. It rewards obedience, not integrity. Then why keep it this way? Julian studied her, something unreadable in his eyes. Because systems reveal character, he said. And I need to know who you are under pressure. Her voice was steady. You already do. Do I? He asked quietly. That night, Elena left the building exhausted, but different. Not owned. Not powerless. Observed. And watched. What she didn't know was that her presence had already disrupted balances far larger than office politics. Deals were being reconsidered. Egos bruised. And people who had underestimated her were beginning to fear what she might expose. Because Elena Harper was not learning how to survive Julian Cross's world. She was learning how to change it. The humiliation they planned, and the truth they didn't expect. Power doesn't announce when it feels threatened. It whispers. It conspires. And then it strikes where it thinks you're weakest. Elena felt it before she saw it. The sudden pauses when she entered rooms. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence. Smiles that never reached the eyes. By the third month at Cross Holdings, she was no longer invisible. And that made her dangerous. It began with a meeting she was never supposed to attend. Julian had forwarded her a calendar invite late the night before. An emergency strategy review with senior partners and external investors. The message was brief. Be there. Say nothing unless asked. Elena arrived early as always, dressed simply but professionally. The boardroom was massive, glass-walled, with a polished table that reflected faces like a mirror designed to expose every flaw. She took a seat near the end. The room filled quickly. Executives who had ignored her now acknowledged her presence with tight nods or thin smiles. Others didn't bother hiding their irritation. One man in particular, Richard Hale, head of international operations, watched her with open disdain. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp. When Julian entered, the room straightened instantly. The meeting began. Numbers were presented. Projections praised. Risks minimized. Elena listened. And felt her stomach tighten. Because the data was wrong. Not a small mistake. Not an oversight. A deliberate omission. She glanced at Julian. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers tapped the table once, twice. The subtle signal she'd learned meant something is off. Richard cleared his throat. Our Q4 expansion exceeded expectations, he said smoothly. Despite minor regulatory noise, the trajectory remained strong. Elena's pulse thundered. That wasn't true. She had reviewed the compliance reports herself. 3 regions were under investigation. 1 pending injunction could halt operations entirely. Julian's gaze flicked to her, just for a second. Then he leaned back. Any concerns? He asked the room. Silence. Then Richard smiled. No, he said confidently. Unless someone wants to nitpick hypotheticals. His eyes landed on Elena. A challenge. A trap. She felt every gaze turned toward her. Julian didn't look at her now. He waited. Elena's hands trembled slightly under the table. She could stay silent. Protect herself. Protect the illusion. But she thought of Marcus. Of contracts signed without care. Of systems that crushed people quietly. She spoke. Actually, she said evenly, the regulatory risks aren't hypothetical. The room froze. Richard's smile hardened. Excuse me, he said. Elena met his gaze calmly. The Valencia and Porto expansions are flagged under EU compliance review. If the injunction proceeds, projected revenue drops by 23%. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard laughed sharply. And you know this how? Because I read the full reports, Elena replied. Not just the summaries. The investors leaned forward now. Julian finally looked at her. Continue, he said. Richard's face darkened. Elena took a breath. The current projections exclude delay penalties. If enforcement moves forward, losses compound within 6 weeks. Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. One investor turned to Richard. Is that accurate? Richard's jaw tightened. This is inappropriate. She's not qualified to. Julian raised a hand. Answer the question. Richard hesitated. That hesitation was everything. The room shifted. Julian stood slowly. For weeks, he said evenly, I've wondered why our risk assessments felt optimistic. His gaze locked onto Richard. Now I know. Richard shot to his feet. You're taking her word over mine? Julian's voice was calm. Cold. I'm taking the truth. The meeting ended early. No applause. No drama. Just damage. By afternoon, the whispers were no longer subtle. Elena had embarrassed a senior executive in front of investors. She had broken an unspoken rule. That evening she found the retaliation waiting. Her access credentials failed. Her desk had been moved to a shared workspace far from the executive floor. And a memo awaited her inbox. Effective immediately, your role will be re-evaluated. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. So this was the cost of truth. She stood, steadying herself, and walked toward Julian's office. The door was closed. For the first time since she arrived, she hesitated. Then she knocked. Come in, Julian said. He was standing, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His expression was dark, not angry but controlled in a way that made the air feel heavier. They moved me, Elena said quietly. I know. They're pushing me out. Yes. She swallowed. Was that the test? Julian stepped closer. No, he said. That was the proof. He paused. And now, he added, we see who survives exposure. Before she could respond, Nora entered briskly. Richard filed a complaint, she said. Claims insubordination and breach of protocol. Julian didn't flinch. Good, he said. I filed 3. Nora blinked. 3? Fraud. Data manipulation. And breach of fiduciary duty. Elena's breath caught. Julian turned to her. You weren't supposed to speak today, he said quietly. Her chest tightened. I know. But you did anyway. Yes. He studied her, really studied her. Then slowly he nodded. They underestimated you, he said. And now they're afraid. The next morning the company woke to headlines. Senior executive under investigation for financial misrepresentation. Richard Hale's office was sealed by noon. By evening his resignation was public. And Elena Harper, once ignored, then humiliated, was summoned back to the executive floor. But as she stepped into Julian's office, relief wasn't what filled her chest. It was something heavier. Because power had answered her honesty. And it never does so quietly. The truth behind his proposal. Fame arrives quietly before it becomes loud. By the time Elena realized it was happening, her name was already moving through rooms she had never been allowed to enter. Not as gossip. As respect. The executive floor no longer felt hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was cautious. People watched her now with something closer to calculation than dismissal, weighing her words before they spoke, choosing their tone carefully. Power had shifted. And everyone felt it. Elena didn't celebrate Richard Hale's fall. She didn't smile when his office was cleared or when his name disappeared from internal systems. She felt no satisfaction watching someone lose everything in a single day. She only felt clarity. Truth had consequences, on both sides. That afternoon, Julian asked her to join him at a press briefing. You won't speak, he said as they rode the elevator down. Just stand with me. Why? She asked. Because visibility changes the narrative. Cameras flashed as they entered the room. Reporters leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Julian addressed the investigation calmly, methodically, taking full responsibility for oversight while making one thing unmistakably clear. Cross-holdings would not protect corruption. When a reporter asked who had identified the inconsistencies, Julian didn't hesitate. Elena Harper, he said. The room stilled. She acted with integrity when silence would have been easier, Julian continued. That is the standard I expect from leadership. Elena felt the weight of 100 eyes. That night, messages flooded in. Old colleagues. Former supervisors. Even people who had once rejected her job applications. Proud of you. Didn't know you were capable of that. Wish we'd listened earlier. The words stung more than they comforted. She had always been capable. No one had cared before. Later that evening, Julian invited her to his private office. Not the executive suite, but the smaller, dimly lit space he rarely used. It felt different. Less polished. More human. Sit, he said softly. She did. For a long moment, neither spoke. Do you regret it? He asked. Elena met his gaze. Telling the truth? No, he said. Accepting my proposal. The question surprised her. She thought of Marcus now recovering steadily. Of doors opening. Of her voice finally being heard. No, she said honestly. But I don't like the cost. Julian nodded slowly. You shouldn't. He leaned back, eyes distant. I didn't bring you here to obey me, he said. I brought you here because I needed someone who couldn't be bought. She studied him. Then why frame it like ownership? Because, he admitted quietly, I needed leverage against the system. And against myself. Her breath caught. He stood and walked to the window, city lights glowing beneath them. I built this empire by mastering control, Julian continued. But control has a blind spot. It isolates you from truth. He turned back to her. You were never the investment, he said. You were the mirror. Elena felt something break open inside her chest. Not fear, not gratitude, but understanding. And the year? She asked. A safeguard, he said. For you. And for the company. She rose slowly. You could have told me, she said. Yes, he agreed. But then you might have chosen differently. She exhaled sharply. You still used my desperation. Julian didn't deny it. I did, he said. And I live with that. Silence stretched between them, heavy, honest. You've outgrown the role, he said finally. Her heart skipped. Are you firing me? No, he replied. I'm offering you a choice. He placed a new contract on the table. Leadership track. Autonomy. No obligation. No leverage, he said. No debt. No pressure. Elena stared at the pages. This time she didn't rush. I'll think about it, she said. Julian nodded. That's all I ask. As she left his office, Elena understood something fundamental. The proposal that once felt like a cage had been a doorway. And now the choice was hers. When justice comes full circle, power doesn't always announce itself with applause. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, after the storm, when everyone realizes the rules have changed and there is no way back to how things were before. Elena took 3 days before answering Julian's offer. 3 days of walking through the city at night, of sitting beside Marcus's hospital bed while he slept, of replaying every moment that had brought her here, from courthouse steps soaked in rain to boardrooms filled with silence after she spoke the truth. Marcus noticed the difference in her before anyone else did. You're standing taller, he said one evening, smiling weakly. Did you finally stop apologizing for existing? Elena laughed softly, brushing his hair back. Something like that. On the 4th morning, she returned to Cross Holdings with a calm she'd never felt before. She didn't wear her usual neutral colors. Instead, she chose something simple but unmistakably confident. Not armor. Not disguise. Just herself. Julian was waiting. She placed the unsigned contract on his desk. I won't accept this as an escape, she said. I'll accept it as responsibility. Julian studied her for a long moment. That's exactly what it is, he replied. She signed. The announcement came that afternoon. Elena Harper appointed Director of Ethical Strategy and Compliance Oversight. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Executives who had ignored her scrambled to congratulate her. Some were sincere. Many were afraid. A few were angry. And then came the resistance. A coalition of senior managers, people who had thrived under quiet manipulation, challenged her authority publicly, questioning her experience, her background, her sudden rise. One of them said it plainly during a company-wide forum. This feels symbolic, he sneered. A gesture. Not leadership. Elena didn't look at Julian. She stepped forward on her own. Leadership isn't about where you started, she said calmly. It's about what you're willing to confront. She tapped the screen behind her. Internal audits. Exposed loopholes. Corrected policies. Everything here was ignored until someone without power spoke up, she continued. That's not symbolism. That's accountability. Silence followed. Then applause. Not polite. Not forced. Real. Over the next weeks, the consequences rippled outward. Contracts were rewritten. Predatory partnerships dissolved. Compensation structures changed. Executives who once hid behind complexity resigned quietly, or were removed. Cross Holdings' reputation shifted, not as untouchable but as transparent. And Elena became something no one expected. Trusted. One evening, months later, Elena stood again on courthouse steps, but this time the rain had stopped. She was there to testify in support of a new compliance bill that would protect families like hers from the systems that once nearly destroyed them. Cameras flashed. Someone asked her how it felt to win. She shook her head. This isn't winning, she said. This is balance. Later, Julian joined her outside. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. I did. He smiled, Not the controlled smile of a man managing outcomes, but something freer. You were right, he said. The proposal changed everything. No, Elena corrected gently. The choice did. Julian nodded. As they walked away together, not as savior and saved, not as power and desperation, but as equals, Elena understood the truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Respect isn't granted by position. Justice isn't gifted by power. And desperation, when met with courage, can become transformation. The system had tried to break her. Instead, it revealed her.